Alright, what we're going to look at in this section is we're going to look at adding some additional glowing effects, kind of like a lens flare, to the Doritos text. Now, we're going to use a thing called clipping masks for this. Um, I do want to sort of say that, in most cases, clipping masks are quite simple to use. We do need to go a little bit more complex with this for it to work in the way that we want to, because the Doritos text does have a lot of effects, and the clipping mask is actually affected by the effects. So what we need to remember without the effects, we're looking at a white Doritos text, and white and black are typically really hard for anything to grab tooth to. So um, I'm going to do a bit of a hack for this. So what we're going to do is this Doritos text here, as you can see there it is, I've got it selected. I'm going to put this in a group folder. And the group folder is only going to contain the Doritos text at the moment, um, but I could potentially put the for the bold stuff. In fact, you know what? Let's do that right now because I actually want the lens flare to affect both. So I'm going to shift select both of those and then go to the right at the bottom here, and we've got to create a new group and click on that. And there's the group there, and it's got the for the bold and the Doritos in there. And we've got to drop down. There are the two elements there. Now I'm going to create a new layer above that. So you need to make sure it's above the group and not inside the group, otherwise it's not going to work. I really should have brought my playhead to the beginning. As you can see, the new layer, layer 3 as it's called in this case, is created from there. So I'm just going to shrink that down to size, and I'm going to call this lens flare in this situation, and I might right click and give it a nice bright color just to identify it there as well. I'm going to fill this in with black, so I'm going to go to my paint bucket, G, make sure it's the paint bucket in this case. I'm going to select pure black and fill that in. Now we need to remember this is just a big rectangle that's filled in with a color in this case. I'm then going to add a lens flare to it. I'm going to go to filter, render, lens flare. Now lens flares can be really tacky, but in this case it's going to work really well for us. There's different types of lens flares to choose from. You can change the brightness of them, and you can change the location of them as well. So I'm going to find something that's going to work for me. I might just go the 50 by 30 zoom. And big thing I want to remember with this is we are going to be moving this whole object. So unlike in After Effects where we can animate just the lens flare by itself, in Photoshop we need to attach the lens flare to a shape or an object or a layer that's filled in with something. So what we're going to. So there it is. There's my now rectangle with my lens flare attached. And I only want this to be applied to the text layer, so the for the bold and the Doritos, and I want it to affect that. So I'm going to click on the lens flare. I'm going to go to this area here. I'm going to right click and go to create clipping mask. And what you'll hopefully be able to see is that this has now allowed the lens flare to only be affecting the text in this group. So it's not going to affect the background at all. Now what I'm going to do is run through some of my blend modes, and hopefully we can find something that's going to work for us. And I'm going to probably around the lighten screen area, or even color dodge seems to be doing some interesting stuff as well. Overlay will sometimes do stuff, but we really just want to focus on getting the bright areas and not the dark areas. So I'm going to go with lighten in this case, and with my move tool selected, again make sure auto select is turned off, otherwise you won't be able to grab it. You can see I can start moving this lens flare around. Now to start off with, the Doritos text is currently quite dark at the beginning of our track here, and the other thing I wanted to mention is what we want to avoid seeing, if I turn this from lighten to normal, is if we move that off the page, you can see we're getting that black line. So we want to keep it within the size of our text at the moment. So let's set that back. I think I had that on lighten, for example. And there's my lens flare. This is the one that is a clipping mask, so it's going to attach it to the text there. Let's go to the drop down here, and let's move that right off the screen for now, like so. And let's scrub through until I want it to actually start coming through. So probably around about there. Let's start moving it into position. So where do I want it to end up? Actually, let's bring that back around here. So a lot of this is just experimenting. And we could even, if you really wanted to play around with, you could potentially even play around with moving that to where the spark's going to be affecting it. So let's do that, for example. So I'm going to go position. Let's start it off around about there with the lens flare. The little sparkler begins, and that's going to follow up to there. As far as the text, it's only going to apply to the text, so there's no point in me moving it off here. I just want it to start sort of maybe even having it popping off a little bit and then bringing it back as we move closer for that. And then it's going to go down here, and then it's going to scrub across to there, and then zip across. So that could be quite interesting. Once again, let's see if we can find some other blend modes that are going to help with that. The important thing to remember is we are dealing with a black background and grey areas as well, so that can be a little bit of a killer for some of the stuff. So you may wish to sort of even lower the opacity and play around with that. So that's sort of one way to have a look at playing around with clipping masks. So it allows you to move an object around or a layer and animate that, and have that stick itself to the shape of an object. So as the Doritos and for the bold text move, it will actually only allow you to see that layer through that clipping mask. If you don't like it, you can always right click on the layer and go release clipping mask, and you can see now we can see the whole thing again, but now I want this attached to this group layer. Now interestingly enough, as I mentioned before, if this is, let's see if it actually does this directly. I'm going to drag this directly above the for the bold thing. It loses clipping mask, and I'm going to go create clipping mask. It kind of doesn't really work very well. Actually, that should be above. Sorry, for the above the Doritos. Let's do it again. Create clipping mask. Doesn't really work that well because of all these effects that are currently added to it. So this is the reason why I put them in a group, so that when we do create that clipping mask, it's kind of going to ignore the effects and just going to look at these as essentially like a raster entity. It's just one of the things, the way that Photoshop sort of looks at these things, which can potentially be a little bit tricky. But you can think about all sorts of things here. You could add textures to this. You could add, if we wanted our clouds to go over there, we could do that. And just as an example, I'm going to do that very thing. I'm going to grab one of the clouds layers, duplicate it just as part of the demo. Let's drag that above and maybe just move that down so we've got our clouds, a duplicate clouds layer popping here, and let's right click on that and go to create clipping mask. It is now going to attach that down to that group. Let's change the blend mode for that so we can see if we can get something really funky happening. Maybe difference, and see how that works. And you can see those clouds popping through. It's now reacting with both the lens flare and the layer below. So you can see how that works, and push that around and see how what's going to work for us. It's not really the best effect because it's kind of it's a little bit stark as far as what we can see. There's not much contrast in that small area, and kind of works without it. But you can kind of get the idea of how that would affect, and you might be able to see those clouds popping through. So it's a nice one to sort of experiment with, and in this instance, it's going to allow us to add sort of just this nice little slightly tacky lens flare to it. Alright, so coming up, I'm going to show you guys how to create your own lens flare that you can completely animate without the background. So just so we've got a few options for that, and then of course adding a few little extra tricks and also a vignette.